In 1370, in the early years of the Ming Dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang, the founding Emperor Hongwu, gave out 34 get-out-of-jail free cards that promised to forgive the crimes of the recipients. In modern stories, this is often referred to as the Gold Medal of Exemption from Death, 免死金牌. In Chinese history, it was more formally known as the Iron Certificate of Immunity, 丹书铁卷. The origin of this can be traced back to the Han Dynasty, and it would evolve into a formal system during the Tang Dynasty. According to historical records like the Institutional History of Tang, these certificates were shaped like roof tiles, inscribed with gold characters. Now, these get-out-of-jail-free cards wouldn't work for every crime. For example, it wouldn't work for the 10 abominable crimes that I talked about in a previous video. But it was still the closest thing to a guarantee of survival. Emperor Hongwu continued this tradition and gave these certificates to his greatest generals and strategists. The leaders and key figures of the rebellion against the previous Yuan Dynasty. These were the heroes who had helped him to build the Ming Dynasty from nothing. They had earned the most solemn promise their emperor could make. These men had every reason to believe they were untouchable. But within a few decades, most of them were dead. Not of old age, not in battle. They were executed. Hi everyone, I'm Amy. Today let's talk about the most famous certificates of immunity of the Ming Dynasty and why they did not save most of the recipients. Was Emperor Hongwu just a tyrant? Or was he doing what he needed to do in order to save the future of the Ming Dynasty? Let's start with an incredible story of how this certificate worked. This involved the Qian family during the early years of the Ming Dynasty. Around 1391, a minor local official named Qian Yongqing was arrested for a tax discrepancy. In a Ming Dynasty court at that time, this kind of charge could easily become a death sentence. Men had been executed for far less. But the Qian family was not an ordinary family. They were descendants of Qian Liu, the king of Wu Yue during the chaotic years at the end of the Tang Dynasty. Back in 897 CE, the Tang Dynasty Emperor Zhao Zong rewarded Qian Liu for his loyalty with a certificate of immunity, inscribed in gold on iron. This certificate promised that Qian Liu and his descendants could be spared from even capital punishment. And preserved in the Qian family's possession across nearly 5 centuries of war, revolution, and dynastic collapse was that very certificate. In order to try to save themselves, the Qian family presented this relic to the imperial court of Emperor Hongwu. This certificate was a promise made by emperors long dead from a dynasty that had been gone for centuries. Emperor Hongwu had never signed this document. He owed this family, by any legal or political reasoning, absolutely nothing. Surprisingly, he granted the pardon anyway. He even composed a poem to commemorate the occasion. According to the stories passed down by the Qian family, the emperor said, "One can't always rely on fate, but the Qian family preserved their loyalty and filial devotion. The iron certificate survived 500 years, and now their descendants will be spared from execution." This is what the iron certificate was supposed to be, a promise so sacred that it transcended the rise and fall of dynasties. The Qian family had carried their certificate through 500 years of chaos, and it has saved them. Back in 1370, when Emperor Hongwu honored the founding heroes of the Ming Dynasty with certificates of immunity, these men had genuinely earned it. They were the generals who won battles against overwhelming odds, and strategists who kept the rebellion alive through its darkest years. They had built the Ming Dynasty with their own blood. But the emperor decided to add one thing to their certificates: a clear exception clause for treason. It didn't seem like a big deal because these certificates had always implicitly excluded treason anyways. including the previous certificate of the Qian family. And let's be reasonable, of course treason should not be covered. But here's the thing. Under Emperor Hongwu, treason could be defined very broadly and enforced according to the emperor's own political judgment. It was basically entirely up to the emperor's own interpretation. A man could be charged with treason for knowing about a plot and failing to report it, for maintaining friendships with people who later fell out of favor, for accumulating too much influence, too much wealth, or too much popularity among the troops, and even for being someone who might someday become a problem. By this logic, this exception gave the emperor unlimited power to void the certificate however he wanted, wrapped in the appearance of a legal boundary. Some historians suggest that Emperor Hongwu used his certificates as a test by handing his generals a document that seemed to place them above the law. The emperor was seeing who would stay humble and who would grow arrogant. You cannot deal with a hidden threat, so you create conditions that make it feel safe enough for the threat to reveal itself. And then there was the matter of the emperor's suspicious nature. According to some historians, the emperor was deeply suspicious of his own inner circle, which led to a campaign of suppression. The emperor used terrible punishments to keep his officials in line, eventually systematically wiping out most of the very men who helped him to build his empire. So here is the incredible irony. Around the same time that Emperor Hongwu was honoring the ancient promise from the Tang Dynasty, he was also in the middle of hunting down and executing the men to whom he himself had issued similar certificates just a few years earlier. Let's start with Emperor Hongwu's imperial court. During Emperor Hongwu's reign, he had 4 chancellors who were effectively his prime ministers. First, there was Wang Guangyang, who was not actually recorded to have a certificate of immunity, so he had no defense at all when he fell out of favor. He was accused of abusing his position and treason and was ordered to death in 1379. But having a certificate of immunity wasn't going to save him anyways. Unfortunately, quite the opposite. Next, there was the Chancellor Hu Weiyong, the last chancellor of the Ming Dynasty. Hu Weiyong had risen from a military clerk to become the left chancellor, the most powerful administrative position in the empire. He played a crucial role in helping to establish the government of the early Ming Dynasty, and for his incredible contributions, he was granted a certificate of immunity. But over time, Emperor Hongwu grew increasingly uncomfortable with how much independent authority Hu Weiyong had accumulated. He was making decisions, promoting and demoting officials without consulting the emperor. In 1380, he was accused of plotting treason, including an alleged attempt to lure the emperor into an ambush at his residence. He was quickly arrested and executed. And because he was charged with treason, his certificate could not be used and did not save him. And after this, the emperor concentrated all executive power, directly overseeing the 6 ministries himself, and abolished the chancellor role for the rest of the Ming Dynasty. If you want to learn more about the 6 ministries, I made a previous video that explains it more here. Some historians believe that there is no hard evidence that Hu Weiyong had a certificate of immunity. But even if that was true, it doesn't change the fact that the investigation into Hu Weiyong would drag in many others who did have certificates. Because Emperor Hongwu did not stop there. The investigation into Hu Weiyong's alleged treason would be known as the Hu Weiyong case, lasting over 10 years and eventually consuming tens of thousands of people under the claim that they were secretly a part of Hu Weiyong's plot and faction. And over time, it even reached the first chancellor of the Ming Dynasty, who had already retired. Of the men who received certificates of immunity in 1370, none had more reasons to feel secure than Chancellor Li Shanchang. He was not a battlefield general. He was the man who made the battlefield possible. He joined Zhu Yuanzhang when the rebel leader had barely any territory to his name, and became the administrative backbone of the entire operation. Li Shanchang figured out how to feed armies, draft policy, and build a functioning government out of chaos. Without him, the rebellion likely would have collapsed on its own. Emperor Hongwu acknowledged this himself at the time of the award. According to historical records, the emperor said, "Although Li Shanchang did not win glory on horseback, he has served me for many years. His service has been diligent, and his merit is immense." When Li Shanchang retired from public office in the 1370s, he lived on his estate, and by most accounts kept a reasonably low profile. But retirement was not invisibility. Li Shanchang was still the former chancellor of the dynasty. He had vast wealth, extensive family connections, and a network of former subordinates throughout the government. He did not need to do anything threatening. His existence was the threat. In 1380, when the chancellor Hu Weiyong was executed for alleged treason, it seemed that the accusations of treason were related to people connected to Li Shanchang. But Li Shanchang was not personally involved. The investigation was closed, and Li Shanchang was not punished. That seemed to be the end of that. However, 10 years later, in 1390, Li Shanchang's name appeared directly. The charge was carefully constructed, not that he had participated in the plot, but that he had known about it and failed to report it. This was a charge almost impossible to disprove. How do you prove that you did not know about something 10 years ago? Li Shanchang was 77 years old. According to later anecdotes, he presented his certificate and claimed that he had 2 pardons remaining. But the emperor said, "Li Shanchang, a founding official and imperial relative, knew of the treasonous plot and did not report it. There is reason to believe that his loyalty wavered. This is clearly treason." With the treason clause invoked, the certificate was voided and Li Shanchang was executed. And under the principle of collective punishment, over 70 members of his extended family were executed alongside him. Brothers, nephews, and even grandchildren. The man who helped build the Ming Dynasty's administrative foundation was executed at 77 for alleged failing to report a plot he may or may not have known about. A decade after the fact, by the emperor who had personally written in gold that his life was protected. And last, there was the Chancellor Xu Da. But unlike the others, while Xu Da held the Chancellor title, it was really just a name only. His main contributions to the empire was actually as one of the great founding generals of the Ming Dynasty. According to historical records, Xu Da officially died of illness in 1385, before the full weight of the emperor's purge happened. But interestingly, even his ending is not entirely free of doubt. Later stories claim that the emperor, aware of his condition, purposefully sent him food that would worsen his illness. These stories suggest that if Xu Da had not passed away from illness, he would have been executed like the others. And with that, the 4 chancellors of the Ming Dynasty met their end. So much for that get-out-of-jail-free card. As Emperor Hongwu dismantled the civil leadership of his court, he was also beginning to turn against the military leaders that had helped him found the empire. Many of them held enormous power, controlled loyal troops, and had built their own networks of influence. In 1380, when the Chancellor Hu Weiyong was executed, it was not just the elimination of a chancellor. The investigation spread outward, implicating officials and military figures connected to him, and establishing a pattern where accusations of treason could extend through entire networks. Accusations did not need to prove direct rebellion. Associations, silence, or proximity to power could be enough. By the early 1390s, many of the Ming Dynasty's founding generals had already been removed, executed, or politically destroyed. The final and most devastating blow came in 1393. If Prime Minister Li Shanchang's story shows how no amount of past loyalty could guarantee safety, the General Lan Yu's story shows what happens when a man made himself impossible to ignore. Lan Yu was an extraordinary military general. Over the course of the Ming Dynasty's early wars, he led campaigns deep into enemy territory, defeating powerful rivals and securing decisive victories for the new empire. His successes broke the strength of the remaining Mongol forces and helped stabilizing the northern frontier. By the time he returned to the capital, his reputation as one of the greatest generals of the age was firmly established. He did not just win battles, he helped secure the survival of the Ming Dynasty itself. He was also, by the time of that triumph, completely convinced that the normal rules did not apply to him. According to the history of Ming, Lan Yu was arrogant and lacked restraint. He aggressively expanded his personal influence by recruiting a massive network of servants and adopted sons, and used his power to violate civil laws and social norms. He seized farmland from ordinary people by force. He beat imperial custom officials who dared to inspect his carriage at the border. When he arrived at a garrison city and the guards did not open the gates quickly enough, he ordered his men to break them down. He even openly complained when he felt that the emperor did not give him a high enough title. It is believed that his certificate reinforced this behavior by encouraging the belief that he stood beyond ordinary consequences. He had defeated the Mongols. The emperor had given him a written guarantee of his life. What exactly was there to be careful about? But the emperor was watching all of it. And what he was seeing was precisely the kind of men he could not afford to leave alive in his new empire. In 1393, Lan Yu was accused of plotting a rebellion. The trial was swift. The treason exception was used again, and his certificate was worthless. The massive purge that followed became known in history as the Lan Yu case, where over 15,000 people were implicated in this purge. The majority were mid to high-ranking military officers who probably served the dynasty faithfully. But the emperor needed to dismantle the existing military leadership structure in order to secure a newer, and in his mind, safer structure. A structure that would no longer be powerful enough to threaten him again. Later stories claim that Emperor Hongwu ended up executing 30 out of the 34 recipients of his Certificate of Immunity. Think about that. 34 exemptions from death, and yet most were executed anyways. However, modern historians point out that some of those 30 people actually died of natural causes, and not through purges. But even with that understanding, it doesn't change the fact that most of the recipients were caught by some variations of the interpretation of treason. Some were implicated directly. Others were swept up through their connections to the accused. One way or another, they were executed. In the end, only a few of them would survive Emperor Hongwu's reign. But it probably was not because of their certificates. It was because they avoided becoming threats in the first place. Or by simply remaining unremarkable. The 4 that were believed to have made it through cleanly were Gen Bingwen, Mu Ying, Guo Ying, and Tang He. Gen Bingwen was a capable but relatively low-profile commander, avoided drawing attention to himself. He did not build powerful factions, did not accumulate excessive influence, and did not challenge the balance of power at court. In a system where visibility could be dangerous, his lack of prominence became his greatest protection. Mu Ying was actually the emperor's adopted son, and he chose to spend most of his career far from the capital, governing and stabilizing the southwestern frontier, distancing from court politics. Combined with his personal loyalty to the imperial family, placed him outside the immediate reach of suspicion. Guo Ying, despite his status as a founding general, maintained a deliberately modest lifestyle and avoided the appearance of wealth and ambition. In a political environment where power invited scrutiny, restraint itself became a form of protection. But among all of them, none understood the situation better than Tang He. Tang He was one of the emperor's oldest friends. According to some stories, he was actually the one who first recruited Zhu Yuanzhang into the rebel movement, writing him a letter when both were young men with nothing. His military record was impeccable. His loyalty was long documented. He had every reason to feel as secure as Li Shanchang and every temptation to behave like Lan Yu. He did neither. He voluntarily surrendered his military command and withdrew from active power. He returned to his hometown and spent the rest of his life there in deliberate quietness. He did not build political networks. He did not complain about his rank. He did not accumulate land or influence in ways that would draw attention. He drank. He spent time with his family. He made himself, in every visible sense, a harmless old man who happened to have won a lot of battles a long time ago. The emperor was sending spies to watch his oldest friend drink, and he laughed when the report came back that Tang He was, once again, harmlessly intoxicated and politically invisible. This was the emperor's oldest friend and the best possible outcome for that friendship. The outcome that meant you were safe for another reason was for the spy's report to say, "Nothing to see here." Tang He's certificate of immunity was never used because he made sure he never needed it. He had understood more clearly than anyone around him that the certificate was not the protection. The protection was becoming invisible. And the price of that invisibility was the complete surrender of everything the certificate had seemed to promise. The certificate was not a shield, it was a test. So the one certificate that actually worked without question during the early Ming Dynasty was not the one that Emperor Hongwu had signed. And most of the recipients of the 34 certificates that he had personally given out were executed. So was Emperor Hongwu simply paranoid, insecure, unable to trust the men who helped him build his empire? Maybe. It could be because the emperor himself started with nothing, and he was afraid of losing what he had gained. Some historians also suggest another strategic motive. The theory here is that the emperor looked at the heroes that had helped him build the Ming Dynasty and realized that his successor would not be able to compete against them. So instead, he cleared the path for him. There is a famous story where the emperor showed his grandson a branch covered in sharp thorns. He told his grandson he was pulling the thorns off so that the prince could hold the branch without getting hurt. And so, in this story, he decided to clear the thorns by clearing away his outstanding officials. In a world where the word and will of the emperor mattered above all else, I guess you can't really trust the promise of a get-out-of-jail-free card. What would you do if you had one of these certificates of immunity? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's topic, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.